Hey, good evening, everybody. This is your host, Bill Graham, coming to you live from Model Railroading Live, the best model railroading show in the entire universe. Why do I say that? Because it's true. Anyway, good evening to you all. John Banknick is in. Hi. Ethan Amaridge is in. Hello. Got a special show for you tonight, but we're coming to you live from New York City. It's 9:03 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and it's the 12th of April. Man, April already. Look at this, man. We're flying. Next thing you know, what is it? April, June, July, August, September, October, November, December. 8 months until Christmas, boys. Start putting your model railroading Christmas list together there. John, let's see, Grandpa Rails is in the house. Let's see, who else? We ain't got a lot tonight. Anyway, let me ask you guys a question that we hear on the last show that we had with the artist Luis Ramos. If you were watching it, what did you think of the overall content? Did you like the content? Did you like the dioramas? You know, in a few short words, if you did watch it and saw it again, maybe on the replay, what was your Chris Lambert? How are you, Christopher? I was just asking a question. If you had seen the last show with the from the art gallery with the artist Luis Ramos, if you liked it, what your thoughts were on that kind of a broadcast. Doesn't have to be a thesis, just trying to gauge ourselves and, totally be honest today. It was a great show, all of it. Grandpa Rail says, good. Ethan Amarid says, cool train layout video today. We didn't do a train layout video today. Not yet, anyway. But in any case, just want to give you guys also another heads up. Any feedback you can give us would be greatly appreciated. This way, we can mix things up and kind of like bring you what you like and then stay away from the stuff you don't like, Excuse me for being rude, but us New York guys just do that, blow on nose. And anyway, today is April 12th, and anybody who was watching John's Train Talk show last week, he went out, boom, lost his internet. And he's going to come back on looking at the old trusty calendar up there, he's going to come back on the 20th of April for Johnny's Train Talk show. You're welcome, Ethan. Thank you for reading my name on the chat tonight. Absolutely, buddy. And hey, listen, I do apologize for last week for not reading your name on the chat. It wasn't on purpose, trust me. It was just that was our first live remote outside of the normal things that we do from one person's house to another. And there were a lot of things going on. So I do apologize for that, Ethan. It wasn't my intention to leave you out or not even mention your name and stuff. So please accept our apologies here at Model Railroading Live. Anyway, it's April 12th, like I previously said. People are starting to come into the room, which is a good thing. And as we get into the warmer weather, it was a very wethy, vascally day today here in New York. We were at 80-something degrees today in New York City. It was a beautiful day. Wasn't too hot. Had a nice breeze blowing. And it was good. It was all good. It was all good. So this show is the fourth series with William Baranek, the track planner, in regards to his fourth series is operations. Okay. And want to personally thank Mr. Baranek, a.k.a. the track planner, for putting this together. Eric Elders is here. I hope I pronounced that right, Elders. Hi, Bill. How you doing, Eric? How's everything? what was I saying? My concentration. I tell you, man, getting old sucks, bro. Getting old sucks. What's up? There's not much news on the model railroading end of anything going on here. I've been kind of like working through rehabbing my knee. I went to the orthopedic surgeon on Monday and I got the all clear to do the things I used to do before, which is not much because I'm retired. I don't do much. But no, I did. He was happy with the PT that I was able to get my knee all the way back and straightened. So I went to physical therapy today, and I told the PT guy, Eric, and we're going to bump up the therapy next week, make it a little tougher for Big Bill. But so where were we? Oh, I was talking about Mr. Baranek, a.k.a. the track plan. I wanted to thank him personally for putting these 4 shows together. And, he has a busy schedule. This will be the last one with Mr. Baranek on the 4-part series. And this one is on operations. Then he starts playing golf in his golf league starting this week. They were supposed to have opening day last week. This just came in from Mr. Baranek. And the opening day was last week for their league, but they couldn't play because they got 5 inches of snow and it was 20-something degrees. And today out in Colorado, it's 70-something degrees. So, listen, I'm glad you guys are here. Who's ever here is meant to be here. And I hope you enjoy this show. And without further ado, let's take Mr. Baranek out of the green room and bring him on to the screen. Here he is. Bill. How are you?
I am great.
I was just telling all the guys on here that you had your opening day last week for the golf league, but you got snowed out.
Yeah, we were supposed to. The golf league is the one I run with 106 people in it this year. Was supposed to be last Tuesday, and when I woke up, we had 25 degrees and 5 inches of snow on the ground.
Oh,
so
man.
I thought, well, I thought it was a good idea to cancel it. And then yesterday, a week later, it was 84 degrees and sunny. So this is Colorado, and this is what you put up with.
Global warming. That's,
Global warming is, it's so. And today, right now at my house here, it's 73 degrees and sunny all day.
It's 78 degrees here in New York, Staten Island. So now this is the final installment of this 4-part series, and it's titled what's tonight's topic?
What I've got it titled is setting up an op session. I've kind of gone through all the other things we do, and as most of the people know, besides my design business, I'm just a huge fan of layouts that are built to operate. Now, that doesn't mean I'm anti-rail fanning. It's just not my thing. And so I thought for this last one, we'll talk about how to set up an op session. And this is going to assume a lot of things. It's going to assume that your layout is designed for that, because one of the, as I've said numerous times on these shows, if you design a layout for rail fanning and then you decide down the road that you want this layout to operate prototypically, that can be hard to do there, because rail fanning layouts have certain things designed into them that aren't conducive to operations. On the flip side, I can design a layout that is designed for operations. And in a lot of my plans, I add one section of track that creates a continuous run portion of the layout. And that layout can flip between rail fanning and operations just by using one section of track on the layout. So
Right.
you can take a layout designed for operations and you can make it a rail fanning layout, but it's kind of hard to go the other direction.
Right.
And that's kind of what I'm going to talk about tonight is the things that you need to go through to set up a prototypical operating session. And I think it's a little more complicated. I've got a disclaimer on the second slide here that this presentation may not be for everybody, but I think for those that are interested in operations, I think
But
hopefully they'll get some information out.
I think everybody can learn from something. I mean, if you're
Yeah.
diabolically opposed to operations, then maybe you should change the channel. But I don't think anybody's diabolically opposed.
No.
I mean, it's not like anybody wants to take over the world with operations.
The problem with operations, it's really hard to describe it. And there's a good friend of mine who has I've talked about him many times, John Parker, who has that 2,700 square foot layout. Him and I've talked about this, and John says the only way you can experience operations is you have to experience it. You have to do it. You can't talk about it. You have to physically be there and do it. And
the only good thing about operations on a model railroading train is the fact of the matter is that you're not in the weather.
Well, and I think for me at least, a big part of it is people spend thousands of dollars building a model railroad, and then they can't share it with people. And if you build the model railroad for operations there, I don't care whether there's just two of you or like on John's layout where it takes almost 20 of us to operate that layout and offset. And that doesn't make any difference whether it's 2 or 20. At least you're sharing the layout with friends. And other people can come and enjoy what you've done and what you've built. Because you can only, you come and see the layout, Bill. There's only so many times you can watch that train run around in a circle.
Oh, no, I agree with you, Bill. I mean, I think the fact of the matter, the key phrase here is friends. See, I only know people. I don't have friends. I just know people. And that's about my extent. And it also I think operations entails a lot more than the physical operation of the trains and the layout that you have. I think you have to be a kind of first you have to be a people person, I think, because you're inviting people into your house. And if they're close friends, you don't have a problem. But with that said, somebody says, "Hey, I have a friend that wants to come. Is that all right?" And sometimes your friends just take it for granted that you would allow a perfect stranger into your house. Yeah. You know what I mean? So he invites his friend and you're not. So I think there's a lot of emotional components. I don't want to get too deep into that end of it, but I think you have to be basically a people person to allow people to come into your house. I know that people's houses who I've gone to, they've set up boundaries. Sure. They said, this is the bathroom you'll use. This is where you cannot go. And if you violate those, rules of boundary, then I'm going to have to ask you to leave. And, and I think that's important. I think people need to respect that.
Well, to take that to the extreme, and I'll go back to John Parker's layout there, the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Fall River Division layout. That layout is so big, and it absolutely does take anything between 18 and 21 of us to operate it. The very first thing John does on an off session is everybody gets together in one location, and John goes over all the do's and don'ts. And something that you'll never ever hear, or I shouldn't say never ever hear, that's terrible, but something you probably have not heard in a long time is John explains where all the fire escape places are in his basement in case a fire breaks out. And he physically counts how many people are there at the start of the off session. And the rules are, if a fire breaks out in the basement, this is how you get out. If you're in this part of the basement, this is how you get out. If you're in this part of the basement. And then the rule is we all meet across the street in the neighbor's front yard.
Right.
And that's where John counts heads. Now, you don't hear that very often when it comes
to. No, you don't.
But that's what he has to do to make sure that everybody is safe. Everybody, he knows what's going on.
Yeah, John Benecki says I was running my layout with switch list 45 years. Excuse me. John says I was running my layout with switch list 45 years ago. I've had the opportunity to operate on a number of layouts since then. I have always loved it. He also says you have to respect the person who you're operating on when you're operating on their layout.
That's exactly right.
Yeah,
He's
so
exactly right.
there's those little not innuendos. I'm sorry, those little things that we, like you said about the fire drill and explaining
Right.
about exits and stuff like that. So
Yeah. When John had, this is the house, I've said it numerous times before, but this house was built for the layout. And he gave his wife the upper half. He says, "You got the upstairs, I've got the basement." But the house was physically designed to hold a track plan that John had previously designed. And he designed escape routes in this basement to get
sure,
out of the layout.
sure. Just to interrupt you for 1 minute, because I know we had some late joiners here.
Sure.
Anybody that was watching Johnny's Train Talk show last week, you would have seen that Johnny left quite abruptly in the middle of it all. It wasn't that he lost power to the house and the internet, obviously, and he cut it. He just went off the air. John is all right physically. Nothing had personally happened to him or his house. They have above street poles, and so somebody must have hit the pole and knocked out the internet. So I just wanted to pass that along to you. He will be on next Thursday night, 9 p.m. at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Johnny's Train Talk show. So please, I'll put more of that on at the end of the show. But anyway, that's where we're at. So, but and now we're with Mr. Baranek, aka the Track Planner, and tonight we're doing the last installment of the 4-part series on operations tonight. So, please, Bill, continue on.
Shall we get started? Let's see if I can bring it up here correctly.
Okay. Hey, while you're bringing that up, I just want to bring up the tip of the day. If you guys happen to go to a fancy restaurant anytime soon and you go into the men's room and the soap is really nice, don't come out of the bathroom smelling your hands, okay? It doesn't look good.
Okay. Can we see it yet, John, or not? I hit share.
Eminem, I don't see anything on the screen.
Okay. Well, I hit present, and then I tried to share it. We try it again here.
Hi, Bill and gang. Is someone else streaming? Where is everyone?
You got the slideshow already up and running?
I've got the slideshow up, yes.
We're here, Eminem Rail. Sorry.
So once you do an entire screen, then pick the slideshow, should come up.
Okay. I will do that.
Technology.
When I do the whole screen, then I can't see the other part. It eats up my whole screen.
Oh, okay.
Um,
But if you got it up and running, you should see it in one of those boxes when you do share screen.
all right, let's start it over again here. We'll get it here. I've okay. I was in the wrong window. Sorry, guys.
Hate when that happens.
Can you see it now?
Now we can. Setting up an op session by Bill Baranek, the Track Planner.
All right. So just a small hiccup there. Nothing major there.
Not to
Okay,
worry.
this is what we're going to do. This is talking about how I set up my op sessions on my layout, and it has other information from layouts that I operate on.
Okay, just so that we know before we put this up, and I know you put a disclaimer on, if you guys are into rail fanning and like to see the trains go around in a circle and have a beer with it, hopefully not a Bud Light, but a beer, that you will not be offended by setting up an operation. Just want to put it out there so we don't get any hate mail and stuff like that.
Well, I did the same thing, Billy. I put a warning label here to start, and I'll just read it. It's the way I feel. It says, if you're more interested in just watching trains traverse your layout for no particular reason, this presentation may not be for you. And that's not knocking rail fanning. It's just that it's not your thing there. However, if you'd like to operate your layout, and that's kind of the key word there, if you want to operate your layout and you want it to operate like a miniature transportation system there, then I recommend hang around and watch watch the presentation, because I think you'll pick up a little bit about what's going on. One of the things I've done with my track planning business is I've offered an additional service to my clients. They do pay me for this, but it's about a 16 to 18 page report, and I divide the report into two sections. The first section, about the first 8 or 9 pages, is just an overview of prototypical operations when it relates to a model railroad there. And then in section 2, I get very specific about how the client's track plan I've designed, how I feel it should operate in a prototypical manner. And I speak directly to that person's track plan, exactly the type of trains he should run, the how to set up the way the trains run, the industries and all that. And a lot of what I'm going to go through here tonight is in these reports. This is how detailed that I'll get in them. But this is again an additional service that I offer if the client is interested in paying for it. And surprisingly, about 75% of my clients opt into this report there, that's kind of encouraging. Okay, ways to define operations. I like to define operations in a couple of different ways. It can be a stage play or it can be a puzzle, and both I think are appropriate here. If you think of it as a stage play, the trains are the actors, and the actors have specific roles, like in a play. The play has a beginning and it has an end. So that's one way to think about it. And then just to embellish that a little bit, why I'm so big on people having staging yards on their layouts is the staging yards is everything you don't see when you watch a play, where the actors come from either side onto the stage there. In model railroading, that's the area of the stage that nobody sees. It has a very important part in telling the story that you're trying to tell. Other one, this comes from a couple of my friends that I operate with, they think of it as a puzzle. And what they think about is the motive power, the rolling stock, the industries, the yards, the staging are all pieces of the puzzle. And during the off session, the pieces come together, and at the end, it forms a complete picture. I think either one of them are appropriate to use as what is operations and what does it do. What I don't want to happen here with this tonight is I don't want people to confuse operating layouts with rail fanning layouts. In my world, those are two entirely different types of layouts. As I said earlier with Bill there, I can design an operating layout that can function as a rail fanning layout. Can't always take a rail fanning layout and make it an operating layout. What happens on operating layouts? Trains perform specific jobs. The train doesn't run just because somebody decided to go grab a throttle and run the train. There's a specific reason that train is running. Most trains in most op sessions that I've been to, the train only runs once per session there. You don't see the same train running multiple times during an operating session. There's multiple types of trains. It can be as little as just 2 or 3 different types of trains, or in the case of these bigger layouts, sometimes we're operating 30 and 40 trains, and out of that 30 or 40 trains, there can be 8 or 10 different types of trains running there. Most operating layouts are point-to-point layouts. The movements are done point-to-point. This goes back to the trains running once per session there. And what you're really trying to do, what I try to do when I design these layouts, I'm trying to create a miniature transportation system, not a model railroad, a miniature transportation system. I think that's an important phrase to use there. Rail fanning layouts. Usually what you'll find is the trains don't have jobs. There's no interaction between the trains like you would have on an operating layout where trains are you have trains that are interacting with other trains during the session. Most rail fanning layouts, the trains just run in some type of endless loop there. I find, and I don't, this is just me and my opinion. I find that with time, it becomes boring. I don't care how gorgeous the scenery is, how pretty it looks. It can become boring. And then lastly, the layout is a display. You need to think of the layout as a display table, not a miniature transportation system. Any questions, Bill?
No, not yet.
Okay. So let's get started with this. And here's what you'll need to put together a plausible operating session, prototypical operating. First thing you got to have is you got to have a track plan that's designed for operations. You can't do it without that. As we step back a couple slides, you got to have a stage to operate on. So you got to have a track plan that's designed for it. You need some kind of car forwarding system. And this is where you can really get all kinds of opinions as to what it should be. I have my opinions, and I'll give them to you tonight. Other people will say, no, that's not the way to do it. There's a different way to do it, but that's fine. I don't think there's any one way to do it. You've got to create industry lists. That's really important when you're setting up an op session. You've got to create destination lists where you've got trains that are running. Where are they going? What are they doing? And that you've got to decide what types of trains you're going to operate on your layout. Again, that's pretty. If your layout is nothing more than a logging layout, that's pretty simple. But if your layout is trying to represent a bridge route that runs between 2 other major railroads, you're going to have a lot of different types of trains possibly running over your layout. So train types are important. And then something that people sometimes forget is you got to set up a running order there. How do the trains, what order do they run in? Because in an op session, things are happening where certain trains have to run before other trains, and that because of what they're carrying, what they're bringing, and that. So let's talk, and this is going to be real simple on this car forwarding system. This is nothing I'm going to get real detailed about. There's basically, for me, 2 types of car forwarding systems. There's the switch list and there's the waybills. Now, other people will tell you that, the people want to do, timetables and train orders. And that's fine. I don't have any problem with that. But when you're physically moving cars around, this is the 2 that I prefer. Interesting thing is the one on the left, the switch list, that can take a long time to set up, especially like in the case of this sample I've got here. Everything was written out by hand, and this all has to be done ahead of time there. Now, somebody will pop up and say, well, they make computer generated switch lists, and that's absolutely true. They do. But the problem that I've seen, because I've operated on those layouts, is a computer generated switch list knows where the car was at during the last session, and then it regenerates a new switch list, and it wants the car to go from point A now to point B. Well, the problem can come in is what if the car is not at point A? What if it got misspotted on the layout there? Now, what do? Well, I've operated on a layout where we move between 300 and 400 cars in an op session. And if one car isn't where it's supposed to be, according to the switch list there, then you've got somebody out there that's running all over this big layout trying to find where did that car end up. If you use the waybill system, the car card waybill system, it's self-correcting. And the picture that you see on the right there is the system that I used on my layout. There, this happens to be it's a four-sided system. This one here happens to just show you side 3 and side 4. And in this case here, this car was going to a Spalding Cement in Spalding, Idaho, and it was coming from Rapid City, South Dakota. After the car got spotted at the Spalding Cement plant, between op sessions, this card would get flipped there, and now the card would go back to the South Dakota Cement plant there from the Spalding Cement plant. It would just went back where it was going. If that car had gotten misspotted somewhere on the layout, and that waybill got flipped, it's not a problem. Yeah, the car is not where it's supposed to be, but now we know where the car is going to, and it'll get corrected. It'll self-correct itself. So I'm a big fan of car cards and waybills there. And I talked a little bit about that last time we did this too. Now, please don't do this because I'm anal about this. This is my OCD that kicks in. I created a database program that for my layout that has every car listed in this database, and I take pictures of them and do all that. Then I can create all the reports that you see over on the side there. This does not create switch lists. This is simply me knowing what I have as an inventory of cars. And then I can sort this all kinds of different ways on that. If I just want to know car inventory, I can do a report on the left there that shows just the cars. I can sort it about any way I want to sort it. The inventory on the right is, again, my OCD kicks in. There I include a picture of the car. Why do I do these pictures? Because when I create the car cards for the waybills to go into for operations, I have pictures on the car cards of the car. That makes it a whole lot easier for the operators to find the car they're looking for as opposed to just reading a switch list. I'm all about making it easier to do. And if you've got a picture on your car card of your car there, that really, really will help your operators. There.
Bill, I have 2 questions.
Sure.
M&M Rails wants to know, what does the LO mean on the card?
Let me go back there. The LO over on the side where you see the AAR there, that's I can't even remember. It's American something. Those are the definitions that they give the association gives the cars. Box cars are always XM. I think I'm correct on this. LO I think stands for hoppers, and it might even be grain hoppers. I'm not 100% sure because I put them in when I did it, and then I forget about it.
Okay. And
so,
John Benecki wants to know, what program do you use?
Well, this is a program that I used in my business. It's a $500 database program, relational database program. I used it in my business when I was actually did work. I learned a little bit about programming, and I was able to use this program. You can do everything that you see here that looks kind of pretty and all that stuff. This can all be done on an Excel spreadsheet. There, this is again just my OCD that kicks in on this here.
And Marty's Train Shed just walked in, and it's good day, Big Bill, and all from sunny Queensland.
All right, thank you. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
we know the world's not going to end because it's already tomorrow in Australia.
It's already tomorrow there.
Yeah.
I think we're in good shape then.
Yeah,
I think
so.
we're okay. All right. Now, industry list. Um, you need to create a list of every industry that is on your layout there. Now, I use 6 different criterias. I call them columns because it's going to look like a spreadsheet. You need to know what type of industry it is. You need to know what the car capacity of that industry is. You need to know what car types that industry accepts. You have to know what the cycle time is, and that's how long does a car stay at an industry before it gets picked up again. And then does the industry receive or does it ship or does it do both there? The picture I've got here, you've seen in some of my other videos. This is just a real simple team track, but it's considered an industry. This is an industry on the layout, even though it's just a simple platform that a boxcar comes up to. It is an industry, and it is one that has to be included in the system. So how do we put this together for the industries? Okay, think of this as a spreadsheet now that I keep building here. The first thing you do is you list the industries there by type, their name and type. I've got in there the manufacturer SKU numbers. That's totally optional. That you don't really need to do. But if you would go through, if you only had like this here, where you had 8 or 9 industries, okay, this is all the bigger it has to be. But if you've got a layout with, say, 50 industries on it, you've got to have 50 of these in column 1 there, and each one specifies what the industry is. And what I've done here on this sample for everybody, I've given them all just really good, generic names or names that everybody would recognize to make it kind of simpler, make it easier. Okay. Each one is capacity. What's the maximum number of cars that an industry can hold there? This is important because you need to you have to set up a traffic flow so that you don't get yards too jammed up and you don't get too many cars in one industry. What do you do if you do get too many cars going to one industry? The example, let's just take the first one up there, the feed mill. Its car capacity is 2 cars. What if we have 4 cars that are going to that industry? Well, what you do is you take 2 of the cars, and almost a lot of my designs, I have within a small area of the industry, I have what are called set-off tracks. And those are tracks that you can set cars off on that will sit there and wait till whatever industry they're going to opens up. And actually, if you have those little pockets on front of your fascia, you actually have one that just says that it's a set off, and it sits there. What happens when those other 2 cars get moved during, say, the next op session or later in the op session? Then those cars that are on the set off, they move into there. So knowing how many cars each industry takes is important. And you can see how I've got the numbers changed. The grain elevator, okay, I put 10 in there. That all depends on how big a grain elevator. You could have a grain elevator, it could take 50 cars if you had a big one there.
Mm-hmm.
The New River mine towards the bottom, I put 16 in there. Well, yeah, because most mines have got 2 or 3 tracks going to them. And it's pretty simple to end up with 16 or more cars there. But this is telling you what the maximum number will fit at that particular industry there. The third one, again, we keep adding columns to here, is all I'm doing, is the car types. And this is the one that I see a lot of people don't completely think through. They say, okay, it's a feed mill. It just gets box cars. Well, that's probably true. It does. But as you'll see later on here in a couple of minutes, what's in those box cars is really important. The scrapyard. Scrapyards they'll probably get mostly gondolas, but they can easily have get a flat car there. They could easily have a box car come in. So you could have 3 different types of cars going to the scrapyard. The grain elevator, pretty self-explanatory, probably just going to be covered hoppers. The Red Wing Milling Company that Walthers has had for 100 years, that can take covered hoppers there, but it can also have boxcars there. And I'll explain to you why that can happen here in a minute there. Medusa Cement, probably just 2-bay hoppers is what they're going to get. Same thing with Glacier Gravel. The coal mine is going to get coal hoppers for the most part there. Walthers, they can get boxcars, they can get flats, they can get different types. The sawmill, basically logging cars and boxcars is what they would get. Okay, cycle time. And this is really just arbitrary. There's nothing written in stone. This is what you decide. Most op sessions are done on the ones I operate on, they tend to operate once a month. But what they're really talking about is it's one day. So what I sometimes will put weekly down there, which simply meant that car does not move during that op session. It'll move to the next op session that comes up there. Again, the feed mill could be weekly. The scrapyard, if it's not a very big one, it could be just on an as-needed basis. It doesn't have a specific cycle time that it has there. It calls up the railroad and says, "Hey, I need a gondola because I've got to fill it with scrap," and that could happen every op session. Maybe it only happens every other op session. Cars don't have to move every op session. That's another mistake I see a lot of people make. Grain elevators, if it's a really busy grain elevator, yeah, it could happen twice a week. They're on it. Then you could just go through the list here and you'll see how I've just set these up in different scenarios for cycle time. But again, this is totally arbitrary to what you would want it to do. Okay, goods received. This is where you've now got to think about, okay, what is this company going to receive there? A good example was on the feed mill up there that I just put a couple in there that I think people wouldn't think about there. If the feed mill is producing feed, they've got to put it in something. Well, usually it's burlap bags a lot of times. So you've got to have a box car that comes to the feed mill that drops off burlap bags. A lot of people wouldn't think of that. They would just think, well, they're going to bring a car, they're going to fill the car up with feed, and it's going to leave. Well, how did those bags that they filled up with, how did they get to that company? Did they get there by truck? Did they get there by train? We want them to get there by train is what we want them to do. You got those burlap bags. If there's a lot of them, you got to have pallets. So now you got to have another box car that probably brings in pallets to there. And this is what, again, this is just receiving. This is what the company receives. The scrapyard is basically just going to get an empty car there that they're going to fill. At least that's the scrapyards that I see that I operate most of the time on. Grain elevators, it could be only by, if it's a small grain elevator, the grain would come in by truck, it would get shipped out by rail and that. But you can have big grain elevators that can do it both ways. So that's not written in stone. There. For the Red Wing Milling Company, you can see there I've got flour, grain, bags, pellets, lots of different things can be received by that company there. Medusa, bulk cement is probably what it's going to get. Glacier Gravel is probably not going to get anything at all. All it's going to end up with is 2-bay hoppers that get filled there. They just bring empties in. So anyway, we can go through there and you can see how I've arbitrarily made these decisions there. What you have to think about is the commodities, raw materials, finished products, packaging materials, and or is the company shipping only? Are they just shipping products only? Okay, let's do the shipping now. If the commodity, same thing, we're back to raw, finished, only ships there. Go back to the feed mill up at the top. They're shipping bagged grain there. Well, how they bag it? With the burlap bags and the pallets that showed up on the receiving side of it there. the scrapyard, all they got was an empty car, but they shipped out scrap metal out of there. And again, we can just go through these and you can see what's the difference. This all kind of gets your mind focused on, okay, this is, we're creating a mini transportation system. These are real world things that can happen, and you have to think in that term. You can't think in the terms of a toy train layout or a model railroad. You think of it in terms as a miniature transportation system. Well, this finishes the matrix from that standpoint of the industries that you have to figure out on your layout. Now, does this take time? Yeah, it takes a little bit of time, but I think it makes things a lot clearer to you as far as what the industries are actually there doing. Also, and I maybe I failed to put it in here, and I should have. Those industries also have to include industries that are in staging, industries that are what I call off layout. I will talk about that here in a second. There. Destination list. This is where you create your train movements. What are your trains going to do? Okay. On a destination list, you have to know about the industry, the destination, and again, is it receive or does it ship products on that? So we're going to go back and we're going to start it all over again here. And we've got our industry list that we had before. Now what we want to know is all these industries, are they going to ship to on layout industries, or are they going to ship to off layout industries? And off layout industries is defined by staging yards. So this is something you have to think about if you've got staging, is you have to go, okay, I've got a staging yard, but it's not just a place to store trains. That's not what it's there for. It is, but that's not how you think about it from an operations. You think about it as these cars are going somewhere else off of your layout. So I probably had 15 or 20 different industries that were off layout industries on my layout that didn't exist. It just that those cars went to staging there. So what do you have to do? You have to come up with the destinations. So you have to decide where do the cars go there. As you see in the destination list, I've got it with both. It can be on layout, it can be off layout. The scrapyard I put just as off layout, and the reason I did that was simply maybe there's not another industry on the layout that would take scrap metal. So, but we can sure have an industry off layout that takes scrap metal. And so whatever would leave the scrapyard in a gondola goes off layout there, and doesn't go to any other industry on the layout. And I'm a huge fan of, from a believability standpoint, that not all of your cars need to go off layout, but a big portion of your cars need to go off layout. You just don't run cars from one industry to another industry on your layout. Why? Unless you've got a 3,000 or 4,000 square foot layout, it's not very believable there, because those industries are just all too close together. Most companies could ship by truck at a lot less money than using the railroad. What do we do with empties? Because we do end up with empties. A good example would be Walton Lumber. Walton Lumber would get lumber shipped in by flats and boxes, but then it's got empties that have to be picked up. Okay, you have to route the empties. You have to decide where are the empties going. If it's a home road, it's your layout, it'll probably just go back to a yard somewhere there. But if it's a railroad that is not represented on your layout, then it needs to go off layout. Those empties need to head back to their home railroad, is what we call it there.
I have a couple of things here, Bill.
Sure.
Human City Junction Heath, yeah, welcome. The number is 933-3022 on the grain elevator. Those are the corresponding SKU numbers that you would find in the Walters catalog if you wanted to so buy this kit.
Right.
So he's making it easier by that way. Let's see. I'm trying to see. Uh, let me see something here. I gotta scroll down.
Let me answer his question while you're looking there, Bill, or his statement. This is what I do a lot of times on my reports. I add those numbers to it just for clarity for my clients so they understand. Because this is some of the information that goes into those reports that I give them. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. That's absolutely correct. It's very beneficial, actually. Dan's Model Railroading said earlier, OPSIG has a mega list of industries that can be used to set up industries, and he's absolutely right. If you get a chance, go to the OPSIG website. You can purchase their book, which I did, which was very, very informative and helpful. And
also, what they have, Bill, is they used to have. I'm assuming they still have it on that OPSIG group. I used it extensively on my layout. It's built into spreadsheets for different parts of the country. And
yes,
they are, to a certain extent, actual industries that exist in that part of the country.
Yes,
and that region of the country. And I used it extensively when I had my layout up at my ranch up there. It's a great source of information because if you got something you're shipping off of your layout and you're going to ship it into staging, off layout, as I say, that is a great system to figure out some company, some industry that you can ship that stuff to. That gives it, again, we're talking about believability here. It just makes it more believable.
No, I like I said, that's a great resource. That book that OpSigna put out. Human City Junction, he says, I'm way down on the ops rabbit hole. I need more of these conversations. This is not a recorded show, Heath. It's live. Technology is great until it isn't. So I don't know why that says that on the front, but it does. Anyway, I'm sorry, Bill. Let's see. What does he say, Heath? They still have it. I was chatting with Eric Smith about it. They are planning to turn it into a database. Very good.
Yeah. Spreadsheets to set up off sessions are great. If you know how to work a spreadsheet, it's your best friend, believe me.
Yep.
So again, now this third column is what does the industry receive, loads or empties or both, and that. And again, this may seem all kind of redundant, but it is important when you start sitting down. And if you do like I do, you use the waybill system. So you've got to come up with either at least 2, sometimes 4 destinations for that car to travel over the course of a period of op sessions. This is the information you need to think about when you're picking an industry or a place for the car to go or something like that. And again, if you just don't think about it as a model railroad, think of it as a transportation system. This is what we're doing here. There, a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about here, not so much the on layout, off layout, but when we're talking about those where the cars goes and the capacity of the sidings for the industries, that's all information the real railroads have. They have to know that stuff. You can even get more detailed of not only how many cars can be spotted in industry, at what doors do those cars get spotted. I haven't gone into that detail here, but those are things that you can just expand it there. Okay, if they're shipping.
Eminem Rail says, I want to rip down my layout and start again. Start staging yards, cards, industrial charts. John Benecki says, the same here, Mark. And Heath has a question. He wants to know, spreadsheets or specialized program? Then he goes on to say, stick with Excel or switch to Abinin Ship It or Shinaware M Trains or JMRI.
Well, I have personal experience with Ship It because, again, one of the layouts that I used to operate on, that is what the gentleman used. And it actually works very, very well. The setup time but the setup time on any of these programs is time consuming, and you have to dedicate. You have to just make yourself do it. Once you've done it, then you're off and rolling there. But Ship It was the program where if a car got misspotted, that's where we kind of ran into problems because the whole layout didn't come to a stop, but there was always somebody that had to go who, if they weren't running a train at that time, you would designate that person as the finder. And that person would have to go around this layout. If it was a big layout, it could take time trying to find one specific car there. And how did it get misspotted? And can a car get misspotted? When you're having an op session and you're moving 300 cars like we were on this layout, you bet it's easy to get one or two cars during an op session misspotted.
That's when
people make mistakes.
Yeah, that's when the crew's looking for a little OT.
That's right. That's exactly right. There, the shipping side of it is basically the same thing as the receiving, but it just usually is opposites there. The scrapyard is a great example. It probably will receive an empty gondola. That gondola is going to leave there with a load of scrap metal in it. And that's kind of what I've written in most of these. Glacier gravel would be the same way. It would probably get empties and then they would ship out loaded gravel there. And sometimes they do both. Sometimes it happens both ways. Train types. This is the next thing you've got to think about when you're setting up an op session there. And I promise you guys, I won't go through and read this whole thing. This program will get recorded. You're more than welcome to go back after it's recorded and you can read through this. But I'll give you the Cliff Notes version of this. On the left side is the different types of trains that would run during an op session. And this basically comes from a lot of the railroads, a lot of the track plans that I modeled. Train types, through freights. What's a through freight? A through freight is usually just general merchandise. And in my mind and how I tell people to operate them, they simply run, if you go all the way to the right on through freights, you'll see the originate and the terminate. Through freights, in my mind, run staging to staging, but they will stop at the major classification yard on a layout, which most layouts will have one. And that's where they'll do some switching out of cars. But a through freight is nothing more than what it says it is. Leave staging, ends up in the opposite staging tracks. Arriving locals is locals that come from other parts that are close to where your layout is, but not physically on your layout. These are ones that come from staging and simply terminate at the main yard there. Departing layouts are just the opposite. They leave the main yard and they usually end up in staging. And when I say locals, these a lot of times will have cars that will not, for instance, if you're modeling like I do the SP&S and there, well, you won't see a lot of Penn Centrals on that layout, but once in a while you will. And but you won't see them on the locals because the locals will basically have cars that are destined or coming from industries that are within a range of where your layout is. Turns, those are the most fun for me. That I always thought those were the most fun to operate. A turn starts in the main yard and returns to the main yard. What does it do in between? It goes out and it switches an area or an industry and it delivers and picks up cars. And there's a set of rules that we also put out here that goes by. Again, turns were the most fun for me to run because you got this train, you picked it up in the main yard, you went out somewhere with your train, you did what your job was to do, and then you come back to the yard. And you were out there by yourself. There, yes, you had to be conscious of other trains on the main lines and that, but I always enjoyed that. Extras are just what they say they are. Sometimes a yard will get so full of cars that it can't. The yard becomes unswitchable. So the dispatcher, who is usually the person that owns the layout, there can order an extra to be run, and an extra simply is designed to clear a yard out, get stuff out of a yard there, get it so the yard can go back to functioning. Unit coal trains, they can either go staging to staging, or they can go staging to mine or mine to staging. On my layout, I didn't have a coal mine on the layout, but I had 2 unit coal trains. One was loaded, one was empty. And all they did during an op session is one left staging on one end of the layout, the other one left staging on the other end, and they passed each other out on the layout somewhere. And they simply just switched staging tracks is what they did. Never, they stopped on the layout because coal trains are like third class classification trains, so they did a lot of stopping and waiting, but they didn't do any switching. They just ran staging to staging, or staging to, if you have a mine, then you can run them to a mine there. Containers and stack trains, usually you'll see those run from staging to a terminal, or from a terminal to staging. There, it can go either way on that. You just don't see a lot of container trains. And now, if you have I'll preface that, if you have a wharf scene that you have, yeah, container trains can go from staging to a wharf scene where the cars get unloaded, or the containers get unloaded onto a ship, or they get loaded off of a ship onto empty containers there, and that. And then passenger trains, they obviously just run staging to staging, and they'll stop at various stations along the way. But this is where you kind of think through the different types of trains you're going to run. Now, what I haven't included on here is logging operations. That's a whole different set of things that go on if you're going to do logging.
I have a question for you, Bill.
Sure.
It's from Heath of Human City Junction. First, we want to say hello to Happy Valley Hobbies. He came in. Thank you for joining us. His question, Heath, is Bill setting up this matrix for a switch list or a CC and WB, or will this work for either?
It can work for either. I primarily used it for car cards and waybills, because that's my preference as how to move cars across the railroad. I think people will argue with me all the time, and that's perfectly fine. There's no one way to ever do anything. People that are really adamant about switch lists, well, the reason they usually are is because that's much more prototypical. There, as people person has a switch list and they read through the switch list. What I have found out, and on all of the layouts I've operated on over the years, layouts that use car cards and waybills operate and function much better than layouts that have just switch lists, unless, and you always got to preface this, unless every operator on that layout is very experienced and understands the layout, knows where the industries are at, and all that kind of stuff. Because switch lists are very intensive when you have to read them and know what's being done.
Happy Valley, his question is, how about mixed trains?
How about mixed trains? Mixed trains would be through freights. There, if you went back up and looked at the top one on this list, in the train description, it contains general merchandise there. And that, when I say general merchandise, I mean it could be everything from tank cars to box cars to, you could even have some container and stack cars in there and that. But those through freights to me were always more like a general merchandise. They weren't a unit train.
Steve,
I hope that answers your question.
Okay, Steve 87th PSAP asked a question. But what would be a unit train that comes through staging and goes up to an industry? Grain, for example, then returns.
Yes, yes and no. A coal train, I'll answer his grain thing in a second, but let me just jump ahead to a unit coal train. If you're modeling modern era railroading, yes, then you can have an empty coal train come out of staging, go to one of these mines where the train never stops. It slowly pulls under a loader, and the cars get loaded as they're passing under this loader. There, that's a unit train, and that's why I've got on the right side there. They would go to the mine and they would be loaded. Again, in my case, on my layout, I did not have a mine, a coal mine on my layout. So my coal trains, I love coal trains. I think that I just like to see them run. I had two of them. One was, both of them were 15 cars long. One was empty, one was loaded. And they simply switched tracks in staging there because obviously the one that was empty was heading towards the mine. The one that was loaded had left the mine there. And what would happen between op sessions? I'd switch the coal loads. I'd take the coal loads out of the one that went into staging. I put them in the one that was in the empty one that was in staging, and the process just started over again. Okay, let's go. Let me try to answer his question on the grain train. Most grain trains, at least the way I think about it, and the way they're operated on the layouts I operate on, is a unit grain train will come out of staging, let's say, and it'll come to a grain elevator. Now, if it's a unit train, you got to have yourself a pretty big elevator. This I'm talking about an elevator that, like the ADM one that Walthers has. I'm talking about a grain elevator that would have 2 or 3 of those put together. That would be a big grain elevator. Okay, that type of industry can accept a unit train of grain cars, but they don't just go there, then all of a sudden they leave. Those cars get put there, probably whatever was there gets picked up and goes back to staging, where those that came to the grain elevator get spotted. And then those cars don't move again until the next operating session. Whereas opposed to this coal unit train operation, yes, you could easily have a train leave staging, and in 4.5-hour op session, that train could go from staging through the loader and end up back in staging at the end of the op session. That's possible. I don't see that happening with grain operations, other than whatever that unit grain train brings to the elevator is probably picking up a like number of cars, and that's going to go back into staging. Or where's it going when it goes to staging? Real simple. If they're loaded grain cars, they can go to a wharf scene. They get loaded on boats to be shipped overseas. Very common thing that gets done with grain loads. And then my two favorite trains are unit coal trains and unit grain trains. I like those. Any other questions before I leave this slide?
I'm trying to see what would let me see. There's a little internal discussion going on here. Maybe let's see. Mark, Human City Junction says to Mark, I thought turns are more for point to point. You go out, turn around, come back to where you started. M&M Rail says, I'm going by the chart. It says yard to yard. I have a yard. The train leaves the yard, does switching, and turns back to the yard. Don't burst my bubble, LOL. And Human City goes, Mark, that is a turn if it doesn't go into a loop, technically. And Happy Valley Hobby says, I'll use a Nerf gun to burst your bubble, M&M Rails. So this hobby, M&M Rails, so this chart implies that you have 2 main yards.
No, it doesn't. No, I knew that was going to happen when I did this. This implies 1 main yard. And what has happened here? I'll try to spell this turn out here. A through freight comes into the yard and drops off X number of cars that are destined for on layout industries. Okay, these cars have come from off layout industries. So that through freight will drop off X number of cars. What I used to do on my layout is I would have my through freights might be 15 or 20 car trains, and I would usually have it drop off maybe 6 to 8 cars out of that train. But there were also 6 to 8 cars in the yard that the through freight picked up. there and took to another destination in staging went someplace else. Those cars that got dropped off by the through freight or the locals do the same thing. As those cars got dropped off there, then those cars got placed into turns. And turns can be everything from a mine layout. Again, a mine, and this is, I talk from experience. I set my turns up by towns. I had 6 towns on my layout. With each one had X number of industries. So I had my turn set up so that a turn went out to a specific town and switched that town. When it got done switching that town, it then returned to the same yard that it left there with the cars that it picked up. What happens to those cars? They get picked up by the through freights at some point. They're not during the same op session. Could be the next op session. It could be 2 or 3 op sessions later. Just depends on what the cars and way bills say about it. But turns basically go from the main yard, go out, do a job, and come back and drop them off in the main yard. There, you can have a coal train. If you had a small coal mine and it only held 8 or 9 cars, you could have a turn that was a coal turn. It left the main yard with 6 or 8 coal cars that were empty, went up to the small mine, dropped those empties off, picked up the loads, and brought them back to the main classification yard, and then eventually they got taken. They got put into a train and left the railroad.
Well,
there. Again, I think the words you got to think about on this too is always think about your railroad with staging as you have to think beyond your layout or beyond the room your layout is. That's what staging is. Staging is everything away from what you physically see on your layout.
Yeah, well, that is true. That makes it more intriguing and interesting.
Yeah. It does.
Let's see. The conversation. Oh, here we go. Just to keep it rolling, it says, Heath says, every layout I have operated on uses CC and WB, but I want to try switch list at some point, but I don't know anyone in the area that uses them. And Happy Valley continues by saying it implies 2 stagings at M&M Rails. Human City continues with, Mark, there are likely 2 staging yards or 2 yards or 1 and 1. And M&M Rail says, David CO uses switch lists. They're not prototypical, but they work. And Heath continues with, prototypically, you operate point to point. Not that loops are wrong, but the real world is point to point. And Steve 87 PSAP, okay, one more. So like a military special train would be an extra, would have no stop military loads.
That's right. I would agree with that.
And Human City Junction says, it's amazing how deep this operation rabbit hole goes, much deeper than I ever imagined. I should have stuck with running trains in a loop, much cheaper.
Well, I'm sorry, folks, but this is my passion. And the reason I've said this on every show I think I've ever done, and I think I think I should repeat it here. I'm 77 years old. I've been in this hobby for going on 60 some years now. I was involved in the hobby when an F7, you ran it and it didn't have any gears. It had rubber bands that turned the wheels. Okay. That's how old I am. With DCC, and there's a whole lot of you out there watching this show tonight and listening who have never operated before DCC. I don't think you have the slightest concept in the world of how much DCC changed this hobby. And I mean, it changed it for the good, because everything I'm talking about here tonight couldn't happen. I shouldn't say everything. A lot of things that I'm talking about here could happen, but at a much harder rate if we didn't have DCC, that actually we could run our trains like a real train, like a real railroad. You can have cornfield meets. We couldn't have cornfield meets 40 years ago. Now you can have cornfield. Now you have to, again, you've got to take this model railroad and don't think of it as a model railroad. Think of it as a miniature transportation system there. But DCC that's the thing that changed and now what's happened since then? The quality of the merchandise that we can buy today is fabulous. I mean, it's just crazy how good this equipment is today.
Human City Junction has a very good question. Heath, he says, do you consider a car float to be staging? I am sort of considering my float as an interchange to off layout. I have to say to this question, yes, because on the South Brooklyn Railroad, my car barge was a staging yard.
Well, I'll get it, and I can carry that out one step further, Bill. I may be designing. It hasn't been settled yet, but I may be designing a layout for the East Coast there, where there is a car float and the barges, and this gentleman wants it designed so that the barge is on a caddy system, on a wheel system, and he'll have 3 or 4 barges, and that will be his staging for that part of the railroad. Is they will move cars onto those barges, or they'll take cars off of the barges, but eventually those barges will physically disconnect from the bench work, from the layout, and get moved someplace. Another one will come in with different cars on it, and the process will start over again, but with different cars. I think it's a really neat idea. My only problem with it, and I've discussed this with the owner of the layout that wants to do this, is if you're running code 83 track and you're putting cars on a car float, you better have really, really, really smooth floors and that, because as you're moving this car ferry on wheels, this cart around, I don't know how you keep from the cars tipping over. But the concept is great. I think it's a great concept. So yes, do we consider car floats and barges as staging? Absolutely.
Now,
absolutely.
New Haven Rails has stepped in, and welcome New Haven Rails. I modeled the New Haven. They used waybills, then filled out with their own switch list. I plan to use car cards and have the crews fill out switch list.
Yeah.
Human City Junction continues and says, I had DC in the 80s, but I could not imagine operating a DC layout. Reading Bruce Chubb's book, amazing that the layout was DC.
Yeah, that was an amazing layout. He's exactly right. That was incredible how well that ran. And the problem back then was, it's real simple. Everybody's mentioned it 100 times. Is your operators were much more concerned about where the next block was, and was that toggle switch on the front of the fascia flipped in the right direction.
On my first layout down in the basement, the switching board, where we had the schematic, was actually bigger than the length of the layout.
Yeah.
Because we had a continuous running, and we would try to run 2 trains, and you had to know which switch to throw to continuous running, and it was a pain. When I was able to afford my first DCC thing, I was like, oh, this is a dream come true.
Yeah, I don't want to leave the impression here with everybody that you can't do this operations without staging yards. I think staging is a major help in the believability. But if you've got a small bedroom layout and you've got 8 or 10 industries on it, you can operate by just switching cars between those industries, and that you're operating. You're doing the same thing we're doing with a 2,000 square foot layout, just on a much smaller scale there. But I've designed a lot of layouts for people, for bedroom layouts, where we've only had 2 staging yards there. And it's amazing, just those 2 tracks, how much that improves the operations, the prototypical operations of the layout. So you don't need a whole staging yard with lots of tracks, and you can do a lot of things with 2 or 3 staging tracks.
One last thing before we move on here is Steve 87, the PSAP, says, instead of the carts to use to move the barges, couldn't the guy just flood the basement and move the barges that way? That's what I like.
I did suggest that. That
Yeah,
I did not suggest.
I like this community because they know, they think, they're thinking.
Yeah,
group.
they do. I wouldn't have thought of it. I have to admit that was not one I would have thought of. There.
I wouldn't
All
have
right,
done
let's move
that.
on here. Okay. If you're going to use a car card in the waybill system, you still got to have train cards because these cars are going to go into trains, and these trains have numbers. They have a Pacific Railroad. They have a direction of travel. What type of train is it there? Where does it originate? Where's this destination? This is one off of my layout again. This was a train, excuse me, that was number 252. It was a Burlington Northern train that was eastbound. Now, for most of you, I think most of you that are watching probably know this, but for those that don't, if it all in railroad terminology, most eastbound trains are even end in an even number, and westbound trains end in an odd number. So I did have a train that was a Burlington Northern 251. What was it? It was the same train as this, but it was westbound. It didn't go eastbound, it went westbound. 252, 251, those were through freights. That shows on this card here. This particular train ran between Portland, Oregon, and Omaha, Nebraska. Did I model Portland and Omaha? No, not even close. They were hundreds and hundreds of miles away from the layout I modeled. But this was just to give the believability that when the operator was operating this train, he was operating a through freight that has come from Portland and was eastbound to Omaha, Nebraska. Believability, trying to make it believable. And then the information below there, I was using a Digitrax system at the time, and would give information here about operating the train and what they did at particular yards and things like that. This was all information that was pertinent to the way my particular layout was designed. There. Okay, we'll move on here. Running order. This is something. Now you've got all this. You've done all this other work. You've got it all. You've done everything that I've talked about here. You still got to figure out how the trains are going to run. Okay. Again, this is what I used. Again, I don't do timetables and train orders. Maybe this is a good time to talk about that. The real purist out there in the audience will say the only way to do this is timetables and train orders. Yeah, that's the way the railroads used to do it. They still do it to a certain extent. But you can't believe in an op session, if you've been to one with that kind of system, how much pressure that puts on operators, because they're constantly looking at the clock because their train order says they've got to be at this certain siding at this certain time. And all of a sudden, you'll see people operating trains and they're rushing. They're rushing to do things because they know they're late, or they're constantly worried about what does that clock on the wall say. I don't like that. I want this to be an enjoyable time. Take your time. One of the things you have to understand about people, and I spent my whole professional career dealing with people in business. Different people have different internal clock speeds, and different people function at different clock speeds, internal clock speeds. The best example I can give you is on my layout. I had a run that went up to a sawmill, and it came out of the yard, ran up to the sawmill, and went back to the yard. It was a sawmill turn. I had one operator that it took him about 26 or 27 minutes to perform that operation. And this layout was in a room that was 25 by 25, so it wasn't a huge layout. But it took him a little less than a half hour to perform that operation. The next op session, I have a different individual run exactly the same train, doing exactly the same thing. And he did it in about 9 minutes. There. Now, they both did the job correctly, but here's one person that can do it in 9 minutes and another person that does it in 27. Both of those were wrong. The person that did it in 9 minutes was rushing, and he was probably running his train at 100 miles an hour. The person that took 27 minutes, he was probably running his train at 15 miles an hour scale speed. He was doing it way too slow and that. But that again, that's all based on people's internal clocks there. I don't like that. I don't like the pressure that that puts on people if they have to look at a clock all the time.
The guy who was running it at 27 minutes, he was running it. What, he was switching out an industry?
Well, what he was doing is he was double. He had actually that job required about 7 to 8 cars to be switched in and switched out. Okay, so when you got to the sawmill, you had to switch out cars that were already there, and you had to drop off the ones you brought up. Well, yes, there was a process that you had to think your way through to do this. Well, the gentleman that took 27 minutes, he double checked everything he did. Every move that he made, he double, was this the right move? The gentleman that took himself less than 10 minutes to do the same job, he just was, he flipped the directional switch and zoom, the train would come out of a siding. He'd switch it, zoom, it would go back. And again, his internal clock, he didn't think about scale speeds. That was actually that particular situation is what caused me on that layout to take every one of my engines, and I reprogrammed the decoders in every one of them, so no engine ran over a scale speed of 30 miles an hour scale speed.
Well,
most of them ran at about 25.
I have to tell you, I sometimes work on a layout on a guy in New Jersey, and it's an N scale layout. And the guy's a former train master at Conrail, retired. And he actually, he has a timed where you should be and how you should be operating. And if you finish a switching job early, he goes over and he wants to know how you did the switching, how you switched out. And if you go over the speed limit, he literally writes you up, literally writes a rip sheet on you. If like, say, like you just said, is 27 minutes and you go to 29 or 30, he doesn't penalize you because he knows you did it safely. So it depends on who's running the layout, I mean,
it's exactly right. So that's why I don't like the timetable and train orders, the TT and TO as they call it. I've always operated on a sequential train list. These are the trains that I put together. This was a list of trains for, as you can see, it says at the top, it was the third off session we held on this layout of mine. And each job, there was a different job, and those were all set up ahead of time by me so that certain things would happen. Example, the first one at the top would be a good example. It was the Potlatch paper mill. It was I called the Potlatch mill job. There, went over to the Potlatch paper mill that I had on the layout there. It was a turn. It simply went over. It terminated in Lewiston Yard there. That train had to run first in the off session because there were cars that train was picking up on the turn that needed to go out on through freights later in the off session. So that was a train I needed to have run early so those cars could get out of the paper mill, get over to the yard, and be there ready to be picked up when a specific train came through to pick them up. But as you just go through the list there, you see, and how did I determine who got which trains? Most of us out here in Colorado, and I don't think it's any different anyplace else, we have seniority lists. And depending on where you are on the seniority list, if you're at the top, say we had 6 guys going to operate on a layout, and 3 of them were at the top of the seniority list, let's say. Okay, those 3 gentlemen, those 3 people get to choose which trains they want to run. And then the people that are not on the seniority list, then they run any of the other trains. They get to run the other trains. What I would do here, just to finish this here, is when you would run your train, like the Potlatch paper mill, when you were done with that job, then you came to me and I simply gave you the next train in the list that was supposed to run that isn't already out on the layout someplace there.
Well, M&M Rail says so. The operator has to have car cards, train card, an awaywood bill, a throttle, and snacks.
And snacks,
And
absolutely.
that's why God created conductors.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely had to have snacks. Is what
No
you had to have.
beverages. John Benecki says no beverages are allowed in the layout.
Yeah.
And stuff like that.
Something I'd like to point out with this list is I put these lists together for each op session. Again, this happened to be the third one we did, so we were still experimenting with this list. I think we probably had a couple dozen op sessions before I tore that layout down and built another one. But the interesting was whether it was number 3 or it was number 24 on the op session, we never ever got through this list in exactly the order that I had put it out there, because something would pop up, something would happen, and we would say, "Oh, wait a minute, this train's got to run. I need to run this train now, so we'll skip this train and we'll come back to it and pick it up a little bit later." But that's the advantage of it sequential, is you had the ability to make these quick on your feet calls and no pressure on anybody. Because again, each one of these trains, when an operator grabbed one of these trains to run it on the layout, that's all they had to worry about was their train. They didn't have to worry about, they had to be a certain place at a certain time and all that kind of stuff.
Human City Junction says I keep getting confused with the fast clock and the TT and TO.
Well, if you're doing timetables, you will have a list of where you're supposed to be at a certain time. What will be in the room a lot of times is a clock, and they used to be fast clocks.
Right.
In model railroading, you have fast clocks that, for example, a popular one was a 4-to-1, so that the clock would be geared so that if it was a 4-to-1, it would take 15 minutes for that clock to go actually 1 hour. It would go 1 hour and 15. That was a 4-to-1.
Yeah,
system.
I used a big old what do you call it? One of those big rounded clocks with the that you see in school or a business, and I would put yellow cellophane on the 15 minutes.
Right.
So I would divide it. So when the when it went past the cellophane at the end of the cellophane, then we've operated for an hour.
That's right. The problem is again, these clocks are on the wall and you're running a train. I've seen it happen. I've operated on these layouts, and pretty soon your operators, if they get bogged down in a place where the switching took a little longer, now they're all in a big panic because the timetable says they have to be at this location. Let's assume it's a siding. They have to get off on this siding because there's a passenger train coming at them there that's has priority over everything else. What these operators are doing is they're worried. I got to get done because I got to get to this siding by the time it says on the timetable there, or the train order that is issued by the dispatcher. And again, believe me, the purists out there will tell you it's the only way to operate, and I have no problem with that. I just try to make my off sessions, I try to make them enjoyable and fairly simple, and people can do things at their own pace.
Yeah.
There.
M&M Rail says, do these jobs have to be performed in order?
Yeah. Originally, when I set this up, that was exactly, as I said earlier at the beginning here, that Potlatch Mill job, that was the first one I ran because there was cars that this turn picked up at the mill that needed to get to the yard to be picked up by a train coming through the yard later in the op session there. And that, so yes, some of these trains ran at specific times. If you go down this list here and you go down to where it says SP Spalding turn, as you see, that's much later in the op session. Okay. That particular train there had to wait. That train couldn't run early because there were cars coming in on through freights that were for the town of Spalding. That's why it was called Spalding Turn, because I had a city named Spalding there. There were cars that would come in on a through freight that were going to go to some industries in Spalding. So I never ran the Spalding turn till later in the off session, so that some of those through freights that you see up above were dropping cars off for that. That's right. There's an exact order. There, I take that back. I'm sorry, that's not a good term. There's a order that you try to have them run in, and that. But again, uh, it never ever worked out perfectly because things always happened. But the reason you give them names and you have the to and from is this just adds to the realism or the believability of the railroad is why it does it. Okay, let's move on here. My final thoughts, and this is there. This is strictly my opinion. Okay, I'll stand behind it, but it's not for everybody. Model railroads designed with a specific purpose of creating a miniature transportation system last much longer than model railroads designed for rail fanning. I know of numerous 30-year-old layouts that were designed from the outset for operations. They're still functioning today the way they functioned 30 years there. I think that's a pretty good testament to that. I don't think there's a whole lot of 30-year-old rail fanning layouts still out there, except maybe in museums, because when you think about it, a museum layout is really basically a rail fanning layout. That's what it's designed for. And as I said at the beginning of this show, and I'll say it at the end of the show here, you can always rail fan on an operation-oriented layout, but it's hard to create a miniature transportation system on a rail fanning layout. And that's my story, guys, and I'm going to stick to it.
There you go.
And I appreciate you guys listening to me. And if you have any questions, I'll go back through the slides and we'll talk about it if you'd like.
That was very enlightening. Human City Junction says, and do not leave the yard until your time with TT and TO, or everyone will talk about you in the next several op sessions. So very, very true.
That's true. That is true. He's right. There.
Bill,
Absolutely.
Human City Junction continues by saying, Bill's opinion should be everyone's opinion. And Eminem Rao says, the kind of like teaching. I have an order, but it usually doesn't work out.
Well, again, that sequential order that I showed earlier in these slides, we never got through one of them in exact order that we had it done there, but we always started out with the good intentions of doing it.
When I operate on someone else's layout, I'm always respectful, and I haven't operated on many, but I'm always respectful of how they want to do things,
Right.
And I'm the kind of guy that goes to an operating session with the attitude of having a good time and talking to other like-minded people, but I don't really take it too seriously, and not that I'll intentionally do something that would be destructive. I just like to have a good time, and I'm not going to take it too seriously because it's not life and death. You know what I mean? When I worked for the transit authority, I could kid around, but once I put my handles on the train, then it became serious for me.
Well, let me tell you how go ahead, Bill.
No. Eminem Rail says it was very informative. And not that, again, not to consider it great series, Bill. Thank you, Grandpa Rail says. But it's not that I would never do anything intentional to make it bad for the others, but I wouldn't get so, like, I was at a couple of op sessions where guys, those guys that were rushing around to get their train off the track so that so-and-so's passenger train could come through. And I remember one guy who he split the switch and derailed the first two engines on his car, and he literally had a hissy fit. And I was like, I looked at him and apparently this guy doesn't realize, he does realize how serious it is, but it's not this serious. No one died from it.
Two stories about that.
And no one handed him a piss cup.
No.
Two stories
said,
here, you got to pee in this cup and you got to go. I remember the first time I went to operate, and I was a bit nervous, and my wife informed me. She says, why are you so nervous? I said, well, I've never done this before. She says, you did it for 31 years, you knucklehead. You transported millions of people, and you never. And when I realized what the job was, when I got there, and he said, because I had no seniority, so I was basically extra on the list.
Yeah,
So like everybody else, he had a crew room set up with donuts and coffee, and I was like, when I got there and I realized, wait a minute, I'd done this before. That's when my transit authority mentality came in, and I was like, I just got to bring the train out and then wait around for him to give the yardmaster to give me orders to move the train again. So I got downtime. So I tried to convince the guy who was doing the op session, if the next time I come by, can I bring a crock pot with hot dogs and have my own concession stand? Sell the coffee and the the hot dogs for $2. I'll make a little money and I'll move the train. Because that's what this is. This is all just hurry up and wait.
2 stories about how you can get so real serious and not be real serious about it. First story, this gentleman has since moved but he's actually been in a number of the model railroad books over the years. We had a lot of fun on his layout but what you just described, where a guy picked a switch and derailed a train, when that happened on that layout, everything in that region on the railroad stopped, and they actually brought out a work train. And the work train showed up on site and repaired the track and moved the cars, and nothing happened in that area till that got repaired. Nobody could just 050 and put them back on the tracks and keep going.
No, I understand.
I thought that was kind of cool. Then on the flip side of that, a good friend of mine has a layout that I've operated on many, many times. He hands out aprons that we wear that are just small aprons you put on. That's where you put your car cards, your way bills, and all. You keep them in your aprons and that, because you put them in your pocket of your shirt, like I've done 2 or 3 times. I go home with the packet in my pocket. But if you keep them in the apron, you always leave the apron there at the particular house. Well, what this gentleman did is, during an op session, if somebody really screws up, and I mean screws up big time, the next op session that they come to, they get the pink apron. And he has an apron that is pink. And you have to wear that during a 4-hour op session, because the last one you screwed up doing something that wasn't right. Now that is so much fun, because everybody's going, boy, I don't want to screw up, because I don't want to get the apron next time I come over here.
Right.
So that's where you don't have to be serious.
That's where the guy I was at one thing, and the guys are saying it here. I don't go to an op session to be yelled at. And I remember being at one, a friend invited me to, and the guy gave permission. And the guy was like a little bit, I don't know, we kidded. I don't know what the reason was. I assumed afterwards that it was because I worked for the transit authority, and that he just had a chip on his shoulder. And I made a slight error. I didn't derail. I just went through the signal, the red signal, and he got all upset with me. And, and I just said, you know what? I'm out of here. I drove myself. And he says, you can't leave your train here. You're blocking my road. I said, Chief, let me tell you something. One time I was operating the N train, and I had to bring it into the yard. And to bring it into the yard, you got to go on the main line and then back out. You got to go on the main line, bring it behind the signal. I can tell you the exact signal 87, home ball. You dump it, you change ends, you come across. They were bringing me into the car wash. At the time, anybody who had to go through the car wash had to have protective PPE equipment, and I didn't have any. So I told, when I was going to I saw I was lined up for the car wash. I told them, I said, and I stopped the train over the main line, and I said, I can't go through the car wash because I don't have the PPE equipment. And the yardmaster ordered me through, and I said, I can't go through it because I don't have the equipment. And then he took me out of service. I said, you taking me out of service, boss? He goes, yeah, you're out of service. So I dumped the train, put the handbrakes on it, and left. Went to the yard. yardmaster's office. And I walked into the office and he said, "Who are you?" And I said, "You're the guy. I'm the guy you just took out of service." He said, "Where's the train?" I said, "I left it in front of the wash." And then all of a sudden the phone blew up and command center was calling and wanted to know why they can't get trains in and out of Stillwell. And then he says, then he said to me, "Go back and get the train." I said, "No, I can't. You took me out of service." So if I'm going to leave your miniature train there, I certainly did leave the big train there. So don't, it's, it's fun. It's relaxation. I mean, I like all this operation stuff. I really do. On miniature railroad, I like
Keep it fun. Keep it fun.
Absolutely.
As I tell people, this is just a hobby. We're supposed to have fun. And I play golf with, a lot. And I always get upset with guys who get really upset during their golf games, and not many of them throw clubs. We've all gotten too old to do that. But guys get, emotionally upset over something. And I always walk up to them and I go, "Listen, this is a really stupid game we're playing here." I says, "We put a tee in the ground, we put a ball on the tee, we hit the damn ball, and then we go find it and hit it again." I says, "If that's not a stupid game, I don't know what is." I says to him. So I says, "This is not life and death we're doing here. Just, we're just enjoying ourselves." And that's what I try to do. What I try to do here with this program is not get into the weeds with all the things that we could do.
Yeah. And
do it so that you have fun. But there's certain things, Bill, that you have to do, as I went over earlier, if you're going to hold a successful op session.
No, I agree with you, Bill. Like when we used to have the op sessions on my South Brooklyn Railroad, one of the guys, Jerry Esposito, he would come and he would operate the train too fast. Sure. And I would tell him, "Jerry, he was a former supervisor in the TA, former motorman." So I said, "Jed, this isn't," he says, "Yeah, but this is just toy trains." I said, "I know it is, but just knock it down a bit." So one night he was there and he rear-ended one of the coal car, the oil cars. They had molasses for the Brooklyn Candy Company. They had oil for the Genco oil, and he rear-ended it, and he derailed, and he took like 6 of the cars off the rail. So I looked at him, and all the other guys were like, "Jerry, what are you doing?" And I said, "That's it." So I didn't say anything, and we brought the maintenance away, because the rule on my layout was you can't put your hands on the derailment until the maintenance away is switched out and brought close to the derailment. So it made it more interesting and stuff. So he's grousing and complaining. He's more embarrassed than he is pissed off. So at the end of the session, I had him, clean up, take the cups out and everything. And we came out to the dining room, and I had coffee made and I had pastry set out. So when he came out, he was like, "Where's my coffee?" I said, "You get no coffee, my friend." And I gave him a plastic cup. I said, "Go in the bathroom and urinate in this. All right? Because I'm going to have it drug tested." So he was like, "What are you doing?" And then the next time we came, I had a pink rabbit that I had him carry around. So everybody knew he screwed up. But he laughed. He joked about it.
Well, but John, on John's layout, the big layout there that takes 18 or 20 guys to operate on. Not only does he have this meeting at the beginning of an op session, so everybody knows what's going on. At the end of the op session, nobody leaves until we all get together and have a meeting. And John wants to know what went right, what went wrong, where did you have problems tonight? Because then he makes a list of those things.
Absolutely.
Prepares them between that op session and the next op session.
Absolutely. Eminem Rails wants to know, did he pass the test? Actually, no. He's like, he takes so much medication that the spectrometer couldn't even handle it. So, but he's been back, well, when we had the layout running. And he also says, mental note, please don't mess with Bill. I'm a nice guy, Mark. Come on. Hey, Bill, man, did we went really over the hour. It was a very interesting. I
know that. I never expected this to happen. I just thought, well, these guys they'll be real polite and they'll listen to me, and then they'll go, "Okay, he's done."
No, there's so much more here that should be covered, and I'm sure that there's 1,001 questions that they have that their little fingers couldn't type out quick enough. But I
Best advice I want to give everybody is if you think you're interested in this type of model railroading, please find a layout where they hold op sessions and go to them. Because most of those layouts that have op sessions, they're more than willing to let newbies come in. It's not a click. Most of them are not a click where it's private. You can't join. And the only way you're going to really understand what I said tonight, or any books you read, is you have to physically go experience it to do it.
Yeah, they were. It's good, and just if you go to a layout and you don't know anything about model railroading or anything about railroading, just listen. They're gonna charge you, and they're gonna make get on your case, but their
two
own
layouts. I designed 2 layouts, and I got question after question after question from those 2 people. Why are you doing this? Why are you designing it this way? With both of them, I suggested that they go find a club in their area and see if they'll let you come to an op session. Fortunately, both of them were able to do that. And it was very interesting because I had both of them contact me afterwards, and both of them said didn't know each other, different parts of the country, but both of them said exactly the same thing to me. They both said, when I left there, they said, Bill, the light bulb went off. And they said, now I understand why you did this. And why. He goes, I didn't understand until I physically had been there and done it.
Yep.
He said,
absolutely
that's
true.
my number
Absolutely.
one piece of advice.
Yep. Well, Bill, I want to thank you very much
You're
again
welcome.
for taking care of this and for having this 4-part series. It was very enlightening. If anybody missed any of the other 3, we have them on the Model Railroading Live. Don't go on the video, go on the live, and it will bring you to these videos, and you can check them out, and you can stop and pause and write. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Mr. Baranek. He'd be more than happy to assist you and help you. And thank you guys out there in Model Railroading Live land for submitting your questions and being patient with our technical difficulties. We greatly appreciate it. And I want to thank John Mitchell, the director, producer, the chief cook and bottle washer of this operation. Because without him, I'm just not talking to anybody. I'm talking to dead air, and it's greatly appreciated. And I want to thank you guys out there for being a part of the audience and bringing such good and balanced and intelligent questions and just being all around nice guys. I greatly appreciate looking forward to doing it again. Once again, Johnny's Train Talk Show will be on next Thursday, April 20th at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. That's where you guys can come in and be a part of the show and even be part in the panel. And he has a link to get you on the live show. So if you want, please feel free to join in next Thursday, April 20th at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Right now, we're in the process of looking for more guests for Who's Big Bill Talking To. If you know anybody, doesn't matter if they have 1 subscriber or 2 subscribers or 1,000 and 150 or whatever. If you think they're, to be on the show, I'd like to reach out. So you can send me an email at South Brooklyn, BKLYN@gmail.com. Okay, greatly appreciated. And we can get them on the show. And right now I'm in the process. I've sent out several emails to potential interviewees or interviewers or whatever. I don't even know what I'm talking about anymore. But anyway, you guys take care. You be well, be blessed, and be safe out there, all right? Take care, and we'll see you guys on the radio.